Hello, good afternoon, and welcome back to another webinar brought to you by the First Nations Public Service Secretariat and Indigenous Services Canada. This is another town hall where they're going to provide some updates from the executive leadership team. We've done about 3 of these, so this is number 4. My name is Selena Dorme. I'm the engagement coordinator for the FNPSS. I'm also from the Tsleil-Waututh Nation here in North Vancouver. I also want to recognize our neighboring nations on these traditional territory of the Squamish and the Musqueam peoples. I'd like to introduce our 2 main speakers, although we do have a significant number of the executive leadership team kind of hiding out in the background. But we do have Catherine Lappe with us today. She's the Regional Director General for Indigenous Services Canada, and we have Bill Guerin, the Associate Regional Director General, also with Indigenous Services Canada. So thank you both so much for joining. I'm looking forward to a really great informational session. So I'm going to hand it over to Catherine. I believe you're kicking us off.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for that, Selena. It's a great pleasure to be back with you today. I also want to start by acknowledging that over these last few months, I've had the great privilege of being able to work and live on the unceded and traditional territories of the Squamish, and really appreciate being able to spend all my time here. My thanks to the First Nations Public Service Secretariat for hosting this. It struck me sort of in feedback that you've given FNPSS and us, and just with the passage of time, that it might be useful for us just to reconnect, to share a bit of information on our side, and to hear about how things are going on in your communities. We appreciate it's summer, and it's great to see on social media that many of you are getting a chance to spend time with your families, to spend time on the land, on the water, and to re-energize as we head into the fall far more quickly than probably any of us would want to. I want to also start by acknowledging that you've all done a tremendous job in working with your communities to manage the control of the virus. We know that a number of First Nations have unfortunately had to deal with it coming into the communities, and they as well have done an incredible job then in containing it. Most recently, of course, the Haida have had now 20 cases in Haida Gwaii, and you know, are doing a tremendous effort, had done a tremendous effort in trying to keep it off the islands, but equally we're preparing for the possibility of it coming to their communities. And I know that we all stand with them in hoping that they are able to work with their neighboring municipalities in containing the outbreak as quickly as possible. So over the last few months, quite a few things have continued to occur. And what I thought might be useful is we've got a bit of PowerPoint. I wanted to stare so closely at my pores that I felt that the camera was zooming in there, and just help you in terms of us moving through some of the numbers, because it can get a little bit confusing. So as you know, there's been a significant investments for people whose work and businesses have been impacted due to COVID-19. As always, we'll continue to provide information, program and funding details as they become available. And today is just an opportunity for us to sort of highlight where we're at on a few areas. So what I'd like to cover today is the new ISC eligibility guide, which includes some provisions around security costs, a recap on where we're at on income assistance, economic and business development announcements, and then just I thought maybe we could just touch base on where we're at with the CHRT ruling. And of course, you know, for those of you that have, I'm just checking the sound, if the sound's working, because on my side it's saying that the audio is not working. Are you hearing me?
Hi, Catherine. Yeah, you are cutting out quite a bit here and there. So maybe
I'm going to turn my video off and see if that helps.
Sure, we can try that.
So do let me know if it's not working very effectively. So what I was saying, and finally, you know, maybe we can touch base as well on the announcement just made by the province with regards to education, as many of us will have been watching that. More than anything, though, we want to take the time to hear directly from you and get a better sense of how things are going on in your communities. As Selena mentioned, I'm joined here by much of our executive team and some managers who are also available to answer some of your questions in greater detail. I wanted to do also a little recap on the information that you've shared with us. Over the last number of weeks, we've been able to connect with 3/4 of the First Nations in BC to provide us some feedback on the survey that we sent out. And it gives us a good line of sight and good preparation for future funding on what your priorities are and where you're feeling the pressures. So from the 3/4 of the First Nations, so that would make about 150 odd First Nations, not that the First Nations are odd, but about 150 First Nations who would have participated. The priorities for expenditures are the following, and I don't think for any of you they're a surprise. But about 96% have indicated that food security is a top issue, followed by cleaning supplies, the installation of physical barriers, medical supplies, and security costs. About half of the First Nations who participated have indicated to us that they have either fully expended their ICSF or are anticipating that they will do so in the coming months. Sorry, I'm just
headset, and hopefully that works a little bit better for you. So if you haven't had a chance to participate in the survey and would like to, it's open till Friday, July 31st, and you can connect with one of our funding service officers. Now, turning to the eligibility guide for security costs. So some of you may have heard bits and pieces about this, and I just wanted to ensure that we were sharing information more broadly. So similar to other emergencies we have encountered in recent years, COVID-19 has required a holistic approach that considers social, economic, health, infrastructure, and other assets and needs in communities. To help bolster the existing public health responses to this pandemic, Minister Miller announced $285 million nationally this past May. The First Nations Health Authority is, of course, leading things on this front in British Columbia, and will be provided and are being provided with resources to support BC First Nations. As I already mentioned, security and safety continue to be top of mind issues for many communities. And recently, our department, Indigenous Services Canada, has updated the eligibility criteria for COVID-related public health response funding to now include perimeter security and personal protective equipment for essential workers outside of the health functions. FNHA and ISC are working together to interpret these new guidelines and develop considerations to help First Nations and BC identify when perimeter security should be considered as a means of protecting communities from COVID-19, how to address the costs that you might have incurred to date from the resources we sent several months ago, and then a process on how we move forward for future costs. We do not have full answers yet, but I can assure you that we're working as quickly as possible to deal with that and to support you as you move forward in addressing your priorities. In addition to the expanded funding eligibility, EMBC's policy 5.13 remains in place so that in the event of a COVID-19 outbreak, additional security measures ordered under the Public Health Act can be put in place and would be reimbursed through EMBC and billed to ISC. Such measures, for instance, were critical to control the cluster outbreak on Cormorant Island a few months ago. You have heard in the past Minister Miller commit that resources will be made available to communities, and work is still underway to tailor how best to flow future funding, as the last few months have shown us that needs vary based on a range of conditions and that there's no one size that fits all. While COVID-19 continues to be an important focus, we will at the same time also be working with EMBC, the BC Wildfire Service, and the First Nations Health Authority to maintain readiness for other natural hazard emergencies. A number of communities were once again affected by freshet flooding this year, and along with First Nations in the province, we are following up on the infrastructure impacts. Thankfully, we have seen lower than average wildfire activity this year, but we are ready to support First Nations, and provincial response agencies are as well available should an event occur. With respect to infrastructure and housing projects, many of you are proceeding cautiously with your projects and have also encountered additional costs as contractors adjust to working under these new conditions and public health guidelines. Rest assured, we will work with you to address these cost overruns related to COVID-19. And for those of you who have postponed your projects out of caution, we are here when you wish to proceed, and we'll work with you at your pace, including sending staff to your communities if and when you require so. Moving maybe to income assistance, because there's been a number of investments there, and we can appreciate that the various payments can be a bit confusing. I just wanted to review the chart that we have put in one of our updates. So as you know, Indigenous Services Canada mirrors provincial rate increases. And so what we have done is from the first day that the province has announced rate increases in May, we have mirrored them. There was a recent extension of those to include a period of an additional 2 months. So income assistance recipients will receive an additional $300 a month through to September. In addition to that, last week we sent a letter to communities to indicate that the federal government is adding an additional benefit for income assistance recipients. So retroactively between the months of April and June, an additional $300 a month will be available to support income assistance recipients. What is different about this second retroactive supplemental allocation is that there are 2 options in which it can be dispersed. One is either as a direct payment to the household, or the other is that the administrating authority, so a First Nation, a tribal council, an organization, could use the funding to pay eligible expenditures on the household's behalf, so an indirect benefit. The second retroactive supplemental allocation could include activities must include activities that are considered eligible expenditures under the Income Assistance Program's terms and conditions and cannot exceed the $900 per qualified household. Alternative options can consist of basic and special needs items, employment and pre-employment cost items, and or employment and pre-employment financial assistance items that are available in BC. We would ask that any alternative options to direct payments be discussed with us prior to implementation in order to ensure eligibility. But I did want to flag that flexibility around these items, around this allocation, in order to support you in assisting recipients in the best way possible. I'm hoping that many of you have had band social development workers participate in the information sessions that we've had on this over the last couple of weeks. And should you have additional questions, please don't hesitate to have your staff contact the band social development worker policy support line or contact any of our income assistance team. So if we move from income assistance now to economic and business development announcements, we have also closely and clearly heard from many First Nations about the economic impact COVID-19 is having on your communities. Our staff have been working directly with a number of First Nations, development corporations, and organizations like Indigenous Tourism BC and AFO-ABC, as well as provincial ministries to discuss and identify ongoing gaps and recovery approaches. At the national level, further to the PM's announcement in April, almost $307 million is being made available to support Indigenous businesses through the Aboriginal Financial Institution Network. The Prime Minister recently announced an additional $133 million to be provided for community-owned Indigenous businesses. $16 million will support Indigenous businesses in the tourism sector, which is being delivered by the Indigenous Tourism Association of Canada. As an aside, Indigenous Tourism BC has told us that there are over 100 market-ready businesses that qualify to access this fund. Some good news for them in these challenging times. The remaining $117 million nationally will go to help small and community-owned Indigenous businesses impacted by COVID-19. Communities can use this money to assist micro-entrepreneurs, including home-based businesses and artisans who are ineligible for some of the other mainstream measures. More information is expected in the coming days, including the allocation amounts for BC region. We anticipate, however, that half the funds will flow directly to First Nations to administer, while the other half will be proposal-based. In addition to COVID-19 funding, the National Community Opportunities Readiness Program is also supporting a number of business infrastructure projects. Looking ahead, many Indigenous communities across Canada have been raising the consequential effect of own source revenues and the community programs that own source revenues support. Certainly, as economic activity was halted, communities are seeing a significant decrease in their own source revenues. This topic is resonating with senior leaders across federal departments and is being considered in the development of longer-term recovery options, and hopefully there'll be more to be said in the days and weeks ahead. We also look forward to how the provincial government will roll out the $1.5 billion recovery fund it announced in June. As I mentioned at the top, many of you may have tuned in to the Provincial Minister of Education and the Provincial Health Officer making an announcement about the full return to school for students of all ages, with some provisos around schools that are overcrowded in urban centers. They have put in a number of supports and criteria of how to best manage the risks and ensure a safe return to school. I know as a parent, it's a happy day for me to think that my daughter will be back in school in a few short weeks. As the province has acknowledged, and we certainly would as well, First Nations schools will of course chart their own course. And in fact, I saw just the other day that the Stein School in Lytton has already reopened. We are, of course, working with FNPSS, and the Ministry of Education to ensure the necessary supports are in place for First Nations to reopen safely when they deem it appropriate to do so. If I might just turn away from COVID for a moment, I wanted to touch base on the most recent ruling regarding the definition of a First Nations child in relation to Jordan's Principle that the CHRT issued on July 17th. The Government of Canada, as with previous rulings, is taking the time to review it and will be applying the eligibility criteria for First Nations under Jordan's Principle, and will continue to meet all of its obligations in addressing requests under Jordan's Principle. We are committed to ensuring that First Nations children receive the care and services they need where and when they need them. Stay tuned also for more information as we plan on setting up a town hall, particularly to Child and Family Services, in the near future. And lastly, over the last 6 months, we have here in BC Region been supporting the establishment of Jordan's Principal Service Coordinator positions in First Nations or First Nations organizations, as the First Nations Health Authority will be wrapping up their Child and Youth Systems Navigators by January, and currently many positions are vacant. So should you be interested, please let us know. A request for proposals for First Nations tribal councils and other organizations to host service coordinators, as well as establishing a training and coordination hub, will be issued in the coming weeks. So finally, before we get to your questions, please remember that should you become unable to provide any essential services to your member, to contact us in BC Region as soon as possible, so that we can support you in working on solutions to ensure your community does not experience an interruption in the delivery of essential services. We will continue to work quickly and in partnership with the province, FNHA, and others, and we are trying to communicate regularly and quickly with you even in this summer period. Your leadership is critical for success in preparing and responding to this public health crisis. My thanks again for your collaboration and your tremendous leadership in these difficult times. I look forward to answering your questions, and we'll now maybe open up the floor, unless Bill, you wanted to add anything to it. I realized that Selena said we were going to share the floor, and we had not in fact orchestrated that, so my apologies.
Quite all right, Catherine. You got to speak and I got the video, so I guess we did share after all. I just welcome everybody to the call as well, and also acknowledge that also coming from the unceded traditional territory of Squamish Nation, Musqueam and Slightooth as well. So thank you very much, everybody, and let the chat begin.
Thank you so much, Bill and Catherine, for that update. As of right now, we don't have any questions submitted through the Q&A option and or in the group chat. So please, I encourage you to ask your questions. We have a team of people behind the scenes ready to answer those. Oh, and okay, you can say hello in the Q&A, but we need a question. Hello, Scott. But please, yes, submit your questions. Like I said, there's a team of people behind the scenes ready to answer those. Yes, we will be making these presentations available. That is one of the first questions. It will be available on the FNPSS website. The recording will be available on the FNPSS YouTube channel. So stay tuned for that. Hopefully by today or tomorrow, they will be available. Any other questions?
If I might just ask as well, you know, I appreciate that people may not have questions at this point in terms of trying to absorb it, but if you want to share perspectives in terms of what's worked or what you need in anticipation of a potential second wave, certainly I'm more than thrilled to hear about that today or offline. But certainly we've all learned as we've come through this. We want to improve both our service response times, but also anticipate what your resource and programming needs might be should there be a second wave as is highly anticipated.
Great. Thank you so much. We do have a couple other questions that have trickled in. Scott says, happy to hear about the Jordan's principal changes. Linda asks, could you please give more information about Jordan's principal support actions?
Sure, maybe I'll turn it over to Kiara Taylor, who's our Director of Child and Family Services, and she might be able to speak to it in a little bit more detail.
Hi there, thanks you very much. Sorry, I'm not, maybe we'll get a little bit clarification around support actions, but certainly in terms of the enhanced service coordination model that Catherine spoke of, you know, we do have an allocation that we are now looking to put in community-based service coordinators. So we feel we'll be able to support around 35 to 40 positions throughout British Columbia. And we feel that putting, you know, having these resources in communities should be quite helpful for families as they try to navigate existing services, but also to access Jordan's Principal funding. So Jordan's Principal continues to be available for First Nations children to address any unmet needs, and certainly happy to answer specific questions, or please feel free to contact at any point in time. And those requests can be for individual children, but they can also be for supports for groups of children with unmet needs. So First Nations are able to put in requests to address any sort of needs that you may have for groups of children. So as an example, we've been able to provide some mental health supports where there have been, where that's been a particular concern in some communities. So those types of supports are available.
Now, Kiara, I see that in the chat function, there is a question about whether or not tribal councils can apply to administer Jordan's Principal. And maybe it's worthwhile to differentiate that this isn't so much about the administration of Jordan's Principal as it is about service navigation. And yes, tribal councils will be eligible for the request for proposals that will be going out further as well. I don't know if you want to elaborate on that, but I've just sort of toggling between the chat and the Q&A to make sure that we're trying to answer the various comments and questions.
Yeah, I think that is an important clarification, Catherine. Yes, at this time, so tribal council is certainly eligible to host a service coordinator. And those positions are really there to support families in trying to find existing services, but also to help them with preparing Jordan's Principal requests and helping them to connect to the initiative. So at this time, right now, the review and determination of Jordan's Principal requests is done by Indigenous Services Canada, and certainly we will be engaging on a longer term vision of Jordan's Principal as the idea is eventually to have that decision making moved more closer to communities who know best what their needs are. But at this point in time, yes, the request will be dealing with the service coordination positions.
Thank you both so much for clarifying that question. The next question is, should a second wave of COVID happen, or when it happens, how does ISC plan to support First Nations in regards to isolation housing?
Thanks, Chief Spahan, for that question, and it's great to know that you're out there in this virtual session. So ISC has provided support and funding to the First Nations Health Authority in order for them to work with First Nations with regards to facilities to quarantine or isolation housing, as you're calling them. They have some mobile approaches and had done a survey, I believe, a little while ago. So we could maybe refer this question in part back to First Nations Health Authority for specifics, because they're really the service organization at the forefront to work with First Nations here in BC to work through those public health impacts of it. But I know it has been one of their priorities as they consider what's happening right now and into a second wave.
Thanks so much, Catherine. Deborah Taylor asks, is there a new date by which financial statements for March 31st, 2020 would be due? Because that applies just any reporting that was required at the end of the fiscal year.
I'm going to throw this one to Bill or to Jody, because I'm losing track what day of the week it is, let alone what the new requirement deadlines are. But I know that we've recently sent information out confirming sort of some of the reset timelines.
Hey, Deborah, it's Bill. Thanks for the question. Financial statement due dates are locked in the First Nation Financial Transparency Act, so we're unable to change the actual date that they're due. But what the department is doing is not taking any remedial action for the non-submission of the financial statements or the reports on their initial due dates. On the actual other program reports, those will be adjusted administratively, the due dates, and they've all been or will be pushed back a month as well. So there's a little more time there. And I think if any community's got specific issues or concerns with the volume or number of reports that are due, by all means, reach out to us so that we can talk. Funding services officers are well placed to respond to those questions, and they'll involve the program staff that are actually responsible for the reports as required.
Thanks so much, Bill. Scott Hickling has asked a question, but then there was another comment below it regarding funding for small business. So I assume that those two go together. It's how do we move forward on the denial of applications as of late? And I believe that this perhaps, oh no, wait, those were two different people. I'm not reading this correctly today. So how do we move forward on the denial of applications? I assume those are funding applications, perhaps.
Well, I'm going to assume that what he's referring to is potentially Jordan's principal applications, but I could be wrong. So Scott, if we're wrong, just let us know and we'll come back to it. So just to be clear, for Jordan's principals, anything that, if we're unable to support it at the regional level, we need to refer it to headquarters, and they are the ones that in fact do denials. It's not done in the region. And the reason I flag this is that we are very much obligated and committed to the CHRT orders and want to ensure a level of consistency or coherence in what we're doing. And so there is that national overview on it. But certainly if, and we can't get into individual cases here and so on, but if there's a specific case or a trend that you're seeing that you want to discuss with Kiera or Maudie Russell, who's on holidays right now, but our manager of Jordan's Principal, please let us know. We're happy to work through those with you or your community.
Thanks, Catherine. Sorry about the mix-up. The next question is the 117 million that's going to be made available for off-reserve First Nations, and who could we contact to connect with this in the Prince George and the Vancouver urban communities?
Maybe I'll turn it over to David Russell to see if he could maybe speak a little bit more about the business supports that are being developed. David, are you out there?
Please. David,
I see him.
Unmute you and start your video. Please do so now. There we go.
All right, hopefully you can hear me.
Yes.
So the business supports that are coming are really aimed towards community-owned and community-based businesses that so far maybe have not been able to benefit from any of the program announcements relating to COVID impacts over the past few months, and to give communities direct control over supporting those businesses, in particular things like micro businesses, people who are home-based, who may not qualify for some of the EI-related benefits or other types of business supports. So we're hoping that once the final allocation comes to BC region, the first priority will be to get funds directly out to all First Nations. We're not clear on exactly how much that'll be, but once that's determined, then we'll let everyone know, and then that portion will be available for the First Nations to administer directly. And then the second stream of funding is really going to be proposal driven. So using our existing authority base under what we call LEDSP and CORP, the Lands Economic Development Services Program, and CORP, the Community Opportunity Readiness Program to be able to support community-based needs when it comes to development corporation businesses or other community-owned businesses, and looking at the actual needs of those organizations and businesses at a community by community level. So more to come in the next few days on that.
But David, if I might just add, for those businesses that are off reserve, there are a whole host of other announcements that have been made to support businesses both by the province and other federal departments. And if there is some challenges in navigating or finding them, please let us know. But certainly off-reserve businesses will have access to a whole host of other newly announced program support.
Exactly.
Thanks so much. While I have you, David, there was another question about businesses, so I might as well go to this one. A new business was opened in our community, unfortunately, in the time of this pandemic. How may the operator seek help without a ledger of profits or loss?
I'm not sure I fully understand the question, but and I certainly encourage anyone to reach out directly to me. The nature of losses depends on the actual funding program through the COVID announcements and the criteria that's there for the applications. Some of the loss of income or other types of losses have particular percentage points as well as particular time for periods depending on the program being applied to.
Great. Thank you so much for answering that. I wonder if some people have gone in and deleted some of their questions. It seems like some of them went missing. But there's another question. There was a lot of requests from OffReserve citizens for assistance during the first wave. Will there be a plan in place if there is a second wave? It seems reaching out to the friendship centers was not a viable option for most people who are off reserve. Is it possible to provide the nation funds to assist their off reserve citizens to make it easier for them to access assistance to meet their needs?
So thank you for that question, and it has been sort of a recurring one about supporting off-reserve members. So first of all, there was an initial announcement of $15 million to support off-reserve organizations. We quickly came to the realization that there was a much higher demand than the $15 million allowed for. So within a number of weeks, an additional $75 million was made available. There was a portion that went to friendship centers, but there's also significant amounts that went to other off-reserve organizations based on the original request for applications submissions. I will acknowledge that it did not hit every community or all range of needs. So I think that that is certainly one of the things that we would need to reflect on in terms of how we better support off-reserve members. The piece, though, to keep in mind is that off-reserve members are eligible for a whole host of provincial programs as well as other British Columbians. And it's not a space that we have been in much in the past. So we are very much learning from it and trying to build as we go. In the second round, where there was the $75 million available across the country, we were able to support some First Nations who had applied in the original request for applications, where they were providing services to their off-reserve members. So I appreciate it's a challenging piece and welcome people's feedback as we move forward.
Thank you so much, Catherine. Next question is, with the BC announcement today on returning to school in September, if we do not return fully, is there going to be a reduction in funding to band schools? Our concerns, our parents are not wanting to return their children to school at this time.
So thank you, Chief Crow, for that question. We will need to sort of take a look at the provincial announcement in a bit more detail. I was literally watching it just before this started. Certainly last year there was no reduction in funding to schools. And in fact, FNPSS was able to offer grants to schools to allow them to start making some adjustments in anticipation of a return to school. I appreciate in schools where it's quite crowded and there's a concern around physical distancing that may be a challenge. I would note that in the provincial announcement, I don't have it here, they did indicate that they fully respect as well the decision-making of First Nations to determine how to go forward. And they would like to work with First Nations and First Nations schools based on what decisions they may make going forward. So I think it's a piece that in working with FNPSS, FNSA, and the Ministry of Education to see if the school cannot reopen or there's not a desire or a feeling that it's safe to open up, that there's an approach that continues to support children's learning, mental health, and overall well-being. So I think it's a piece we're going to need to analyze in further detail because I haven't gotten any direction on the funding piece of it. I think it's a piece that we'll have to look across the country because we're in a fortunate position in BC where in fact we were the only jurisdiction that went back fully across the province except for a few school districts, whereas every other province either did not go back, only went back partially. And I think we're probably on the forefront as well of announcing a return to school. So from a national perspective, we're going to need to look at what that means. And certainly our commitment is to continue to support First Nations learners, and we are governed by the BC Tripartite Education Agreement, and recognize that teachers will still need to be paid. The school may not be open, and that may reduce some operations costs, but others will continue to be there. And so there will need to be a full consideration of all the impacts for children and schools.
Thanks so much, Catherine. There was a follow-up question regarding funding for equipment for those learning at home, if they would be available.
Right. So I would deflect that question to FNPSS and FNSA. The intent here is that kids in First Nations schools should have similar access to technology and supports as those in provincial schools. That might mean loaner laptops or other devices, need for support for access to Wi-Fi and various other pieces. But a lot of these measures are being worked through by FNPSS and FNSA as they work through the announcements and the supports that the Ministry of Education will make. I would note maybe to Chief Crow and to others that I didn't see the details of it, but the province did announce additional resources and supports in order to ensure that provincial schools would be safe. So there was referrals to things like increased sanitation stations, more frequent cleaning, physical barriers, various other pieces. It would be our intent to mirror these in First Nations schools. So just a consideration as well that if it takes some adjustments and there's an opportunity to return kids in some way and there are costs associated with that, we certainly would want to support ensuring a safe return to school.
Thanks so much, Catherine. I did get a message sent to me privately with a question. Are there plans for a stimulus package? And if so, what will it look like? And what can First Nations do to be prepared to access?
Well, I think certainly the government is looking at what kind of stimulus package it might put in place. And certainly we're having some conversations about what that might look like in First Nations communities. I don't have an answer for that. I don't have an answer on timing or what it might all consider. But certainly the feedback that we're getting from you from the survey and through other means is really helpful in terms of moving forward. I think there's a recognition of the challenge that communities, municipalities, and First Nations face. What are some of the shortcomings with regards to infrastructure and assets to deal with a pandemic like that will certainly feature in it. And so I don't have further answers at this point in time, but I would anticipate that as things evolve, that there'll be further discussions about what a stimulus package might look like, both federally and provincially, because the province has also been making some announcements and signaling the need to invest in a restart of the economy.
Thanks so much. Another follow-up question regarding technology. Will there be an increase to PSSSP and UCEPP funding for technology, laptops and connectivity?
So I'll start the answer, but I'm hoping that there's someone from Programs and Partnerships, either Duncan or Allison or somebody who can maybe speak to the specifics. So some of you may be aware that the province did announce an Indigenous Student Support Fund to deal with some of those operational costs, such as devices, technology, and so on. So I would encourage people to take a look at that. There was also supports announced for post-secondary students, and I don't have the numbers in front of me right now, but we did put that in our updates some time ago. So there were additional supports for them for the end of the last year. As people know, universities are sort of trying to address how to best come back, whether through virtual learning or hybrid model or in-person learning. So as those plans become clear as well, there'll be a better understanding of what some of the costs might be associated to that. But I'll maybe turn it over to somebody who can, from the education team, that could speak to the specifics. There's Duncan. You're muted, Duncan.
Yeah.
Let's try unmuting. Hi there, it's Duncan Stephen with Programs and Partnerships. I don't necessarily have any specific details to share. Allison, if you're on the line and you have anything to add, feel free. I guess the one piece is, I think we've heard loud and clear in terms of the needs in these areas. And so we've definitely fed that information up for consideration. So we're waiting for additional direction in terms of what kinds of options and supports will be available there. And I think, you know, it goes without saying across the board with COVID and COVID response and adaptation that, you know, the situation is evolving on a weekly, if not daily basis. And so I imagine, you know, this conversation will continue to evolve, but as we have more information, we'll definitely be sure to share that out.
Great. Thank you so much. Next question is a fairly lengthy one. In regard to income assistance, is there any plan to increase shelter costs which have not been raised in the last 12 years? When a community is remote and the only energy option is BC Hydro, the costs for heat and hydro are very high, and in some cases use up the entire shelter amount or even exceed it. There's also no allowance for having to travel over 80 kilometers to the nearest store for food and other essentials. I think that dealing with the current crisis opens an opportunity to consider how to better deal with ongoing daily struggles and help our income assistance clients to lead healthier lives.
So thanks for that question, Cynthia. I mean, I think it raises some important issues around income assistance. And I know that I was heartened to see that it was almost an immediate response to increase the allowance to income assistance recipients by $300 a month. So we're looking at, you know, an additional $1,800 a month to $1,800 over the last 6 months, or over a period of 6 months to support income assistance recipients to mirror the provincial rates, and then an additional $900 from the federal government. But it doesn't deal with the ongoing piece. We had, just before the pandemic hit, we were looking at income assistance reform. Believe it or not, there hasn't been reform since 1956, which is older than most of us, or many of us on this call, so it is long overdue. And I think it's certainly a piece that when the pandemic eases, we need to come back to, because certainly we're seeing that there are great benefits to providing individuals with additional resources. There's lots of debates going on as well, whether or not it's a time to look at a universal basic income, whether or not pilots should be considered, and so on. So I think there's a lot of thought, analysis, and consideration around what income assistance should and could look like. And so I'm hopeful that we'll go back to a broader review of it, and that we also analyze what the benefits were for individuals to get additional supports during this very challenging time.
Thank you so much. There are a couple other questions here, and I guess they were following up to some other comments. Kelly Sport, I'm wondering if you can elaborate a little bit more on what your specific question is. It says, where I was going with small business was that a lot of work went into getting small business off the ground. We would not want businesses to fail because of the shutdown of the community. So I'm hoping, Kelly, you can add to that a little bit more, unless Catherine, you want to speak to that.
Well, maybe what I might suggest, Selena, is that that David gets Kelly's coordinates and that we do a follow-up, because I certainly do appreciate that for some of the, in order to be eligible for some of the programs, they were looking at last year's revenues, and if there was a drop of a certain percentage, then it allowed for eligibility for the program. So I think what Kelly was saying in part was that if you don't have that track record, it becomes difficult to show what the impact of it is, and there may not have been an eligibility for certain programs. So I would suggest, because I see Kelly's writing in here and so on, that maybe a longer discussion offline on the specifics of this business might be helpful, and David and his team might be able to get a better idea of how we can connect this business or Kelly with the programs and assistance that might be available.
Great. Thank you so much. And as always, we do send all your questions and a report to everybody who's attended the meeting back to ISC so that they can follow up specifically if there's anything that we didn't touch on here or we didn't get a chance to answer all the questions. So they will have your contact information and come follow up if we don't answer any of those questions, or some of those questions require a different conversation. Who's Duncan? Hi.
Hi there. I was just going to pop on and just say that Allison she was unable to unmute herself, but she just added some information here stating that amendments for PSSSP and UCEPP have gone out to all First Nations, and as soon as we have those back, then the funds will be issued, and those specific funds can be used in the emergency PSC funding for technology and other supports for post-secondary students and those upgrading to enter a post-secondary educational learning opportunity. So hopefully that's helpful information, but certainly, if there's specific questions, please feel free to follow up with us as well.
Thank you so much for bringing that to everybody's attention. Those notes are in the group chat from Allison only. There is one additional question. Will there be any additional funding for schools needing more space in order to social distance? Was there information gathered to see what First Nations schools or how many First Nations schools needed more space?
Yeah, so thanks for that question. I saw that Thane was on the line, so I don't know if Vanessa wants to add anything further, but I'm aware that with some of the flexibilities in funding that FNPSS had at the end of last school year, they have offered $1.5 million in grants to support communities wanting to start making some of the adjustments, whether for physical distancing or other measures that needed to be taken to address the threats from COVID. We certainly, as I said at the top, when I opened up my remarks, that we will be looking as well at what the province is offering in terms of additional measures and investments for schools. And then we'll see what we could do in that regard. And FNPSS did do a survey of all schools probably about a month and a half ago, Thane. And that certainly is helping to inform as well for us to identify if there are pressures and how to address those. And I think Thane was trying to get on. So I don't know if you can release him, or if not, maybe he can type in an answer.
Let's see if I can find him here. Is he dialing in by phone? No. I don't seem to see the name anymore. Thane, there you are. I'm happy to bring him on and allow him to talk. That's fine. Hello, please unmute yourself.
Hello.
Yes, if you wouldn't mind just doing a quick introduction so everybody knows who you are.
I don't know how to put myself on video. Sorry, I'm having a hard time with this today. Thane Barn, Director of Communications and Policy for FNPSS. As Catherine mentioned, we did do an environmental scan of First Nations, a couple, since the pandemic started. I don't think there were any questions specifically related to space, but definitely questions about what kind of resources First Nations schools were going to require. There's still some work to do. We'll be following up with the First Nations Schools Association executive in very, very shortly here about the announcements today, and looking at further what kind of supports First Nations schools will need, and of course look forward to those conversations about how we make sure that First Nations schools are getting access to the equivalent resources that have just been announced for public schools that they can use to make those adjustments that they need to ensure a safe opening in September. I think Debbie's on the line too. I'm not sure if she wanted to add anything to that.
Well, we can find her and ask. Let's see. Deborah, Debbie, I just unmuted you or asked you to unmute yourself.
Yes, I have unmuted myself. Thanks, Lena. Happy to participate today and hope everybody is having a great day. The grants that are going out will be going out shortly. We have small grants for schools depending on the size of the school, from 5,000 to 35,000. The ministry announced today, Catherine, 45.6 million. I would imagine that's a special purpose grant. So I've already sent that information to our staff to begin doing the calculations there, and what would that then mean to an adjustment to the First Nations schools formula. So that wouldn't necessarily come through us. That would be something that would go directly out to schools. We have resumed the tripartite meetings with respect to the September startup. Our staff is already working on documents for September startup, looking at, of course, what the province is doing and how we can make adjustments to the 67,000 kids that are in that system, particularly the 8,000 on-reserve students. And we're very pleased that the province has put in their planning documents, school districts have got to engage with First Nations with respect to education services and transportation, and respect their decision with respect to if they want to remain closed or have their students stay in their communities. So we fully expect those conversations to unfold. We have a meeting on Friday with the FNSA president and staff to talk about those September startup documents. Our joint executives are meeting and we'll be approving those documents. And we've already gotten emails as a result of today's announcement. Hey, what's happening? Where's our docs? So we are on it, and we'll certainly do our best to get that information out as soon as we can. And in all likelihood, we'll be doing another environmental scan as we move through September startup to determine how many are going to be resuming some semblance of a return to class. Some might do hybrid, and of course some may opt to remain closed for safety reasons. So we want to, as best we can, prepare for all of that and provide some guideposts to First Nations as they fall under their jurisdiction of their respective nations.
Thank you so much, Debbie and Thane, for jumping in and clarifying a lot of the education questions that we ended up receiving during this webinar. I appreciate it. All right, so there are no more questions in the queue, and we are actually just about at the end of our time. We have just a few more minutes. Catherine or Bill, anything you'd like to add before we close up?
No, just maybe my thanks for people taking the time on this hot summer's day where there are many better places to be than me sitting in front of a computer listening to us. I know this isn't an ideal way of communicating, and I could tell you I really miss seeing all of you in person and having those in-person dialogues. This works for transactional items, but certainly doesn't replace us getting together and having broader ranges of conversations. So please, some of you have, but any of you at any time, don't hesitate to text, phone, email us. We're here to support you, to try and answer questions as best as we can. We aren't trying to be invasive when we don't have the answers for things. A lot of this is being developed very quickly and on the go. And as we get layers of information on various announcements, we'll continue to communicate it through our update. And please let us know when you want another town hall or you want to have a theme-based discussion around various issues, because really we can only reflect up to headquarters and to cabinet what you need if we're hearing from you, where your pressure points are, and how best you need support. So again, my real thanks and appreciation for continuing the dialogue, and most importantly for keeping your community safe. And look forward to hopefully seeing you in person one of these days.
Thanks so much. Bill, anything to add?
Yeah, I'd also add my thanks on as well. And I'd also like to acknowledge that, you know, A lot of offices are still only partially open. There's communities that have access restricted. There are still a lot of challenges with the delivery of programs, production of financial statements, media reporting requirements. And I would just wholeheartedly urge anybody that's experiencing challenges in those regards to reach out to us, talk to our staff. The more we know about what your challenges are with reporting, the better we can help you. So don't hesitate to reach out. And thank you very much for your time this afternoon.
Well, thank you both so much, and to the executive team behind the scenes that were available, ready to answer questions. Debbie and Thane, again, from the First Nations Education Steering Committee, for answering and providing an update on these other educational questions that were asked and answered. As I mentioned, this recording will be available on the First Nations Public Service Secretariat YouTube channel, and a link will also be available on our website, along with the PowerPoint presentation that was provided during this webinar. So stay tuned for that. It will probably be up either today or tomorrow. As always, we're happy to continue to host these town halls for Indigenous Services Canada, and we will definitely see you another time. Thank you all so much. Stay healthy and safe out there. Bye.
Thank you.